Okay, I already said hi, but welcome everyone. I'm Zachary Weaver and I'll be facilitating the meeting. We will upload this recording to our Democracy in a Box YouTube channel for everyone to access. This is a creative energy group, which is an ongoing conversation centered on one subject where participants take turns speaking in order of least amount of speaking time over the history of meetings. There is no commitment to attending all of the meetings, and new people can jump in at any meeting. Our subject for this group is simple ways to get big money out of politics. We chose this subject by asking for ideas from the Democracy in a Box community, and then allowing the community to vote on the ideas using ranked choice voting. We will try to make this conversation an evolving one that leads to growth and action, but this is also intended to be a jumping off point. So if you're inspired and you want to start your own thing, please feel free. I'm also happy to help if you want to start your own creative energy group. I'm going to share a very brief description of how the meeting will work, just so you have an idea of what to expect. I also want to mention up front that while I'm facilitating, I'm going to be navigating different screens. Some people have mentioned that they're a little confused by that, so don't worry, you're not missing out on anything important. Everything I'm doing is just maintenance stuff to keep the mechanics working. So we will take turns speaking in order of least amount of speaking time over the history of our meetings. I keep track of that speaking time on a spreadsheet, and I will let you know when it's your turn. If people have equal speaking time, I will call on them in alphabetical order, starting with first names. When someone is sharing, I will use a stopwatch to track the amount of time that they speak, which I then log in the spreadsheet. When someone is finished sharing, I will thank them and call on the person who has the next turn. If everyone on the list shares and we have more time, we will do another round. When we're down to a few minutes left in the meeting, I will wrap up. Sometime after the meeting, maybe in the next couple of days, I'll send out a survey asking everyone where we want to go from here. We may not have time for everyone to share at each meeting, though I think we will at this one. But this model will ensure that the people who don't share as much will be called on early at the next meeting. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, and I was going to have Julie speak first since she recommended the subject, but since she's not here yet, let's go ahead and start with you, Elizabeth, if you have anything to share.
Yeah, and a question for you: is there a sense of what is the best angle on the topic? Like, what's most relevant to share? I can imagine a lot of ways to come at the topic.
Yeah, I know you you probably can more than anyone. So I would say you know, we're going with simple ways to get big money out of politics. That's about we're starting pretty basic. So I think I would say talk about your favorite avenue from here, or your favorite path.
Okay. Great. So the reason I know Don Bender is through working with American Promise and the group working on a constitutional amendment to address the problem of concentrated money in our political system. And I just had a experience yesterday that reinforced to me the sense of why it's important to do an amendment. And I have explored in my mind a whole bunch of reasons, a bunch of questions around other ways. So I think we've seen in the last few weeks companies becoming more aware of how their spending has contributed to some difficult aspects of our trust in institutions. Companies spending money that fosters a certain kind of media spending that tends to be attack ads and tends to be less accountable because we don't know where the money's coming from. And now companies are pausing their political spending because they're worried about what they might be contributing to in both reputationally, but I think also undermining civic institutions based on when it's based on disinformation or inaccurate information. And I have heard a number of different ways proposed to address the role of money. And in my mind, money has been used instead of deliberation, instead of this kind of conversation, instead of actual discourse. And so I've heard things like public financing proposed. So basically, if we give every candidate access to funding, then they can compete with the amount of money that's currently being contributed by 0.5% of our citizens. What I've understood from the candidates is there's no way there can be enough public financing for them to feel like there's really an open marketplace, that they would always be looking over their shoulder because the independent expenditures by C4s and other kinds of groups could swamp it. And then there's one I heard that was kind of interesting, which is make all contributions anonymous. So you can't get a quid pro quo because the elected officials don't know that you're the one that gave the money. There's something intriguing in that, but I still don't think it would stop the deluge. And what I like about an amendment, I would say it's simple but not easy. The amendment currently on the table is about authorizing limits on spending and allowing Congress to limit the political spending rights of legal entities as opposed to individuals. What I like about this is three things, even though it's four things, even though it's not easy. One is it would mark a really bright line change. Like we've learned our lesson. We know that there is more than the appearance of corruption when we have this much spending. I think you all know the statistics, but independent spending is now 56 times higher than it was in 2000, in 2020. It would allow us to clarify that free speech and the ability to buy channels for communication to broadcast are not the same thing, and that being able to spend to be heard involves crowding other voices out. Third, I think it would actually solve the underlying challenge by setting a playing field, level playing field, and get companies off the hook for having to spend. And then the fourth one that I love is that it's been underway with movements across the political spectrum for some time. And so just the idea that citizens have been working hard on this for at least 4 years, since 1976, some citizens have been working on this. And if we were to join in supporting those citizens, I think it would build that sense of having agency, having impact, being heard across the political spectrum, right? I think you all have heard, I've talked to my friends who are Trump supporters saying the system is rigged and they point to the money. And my friends who are Bernie Sanders supporters and the system's rigged and they point to the money. It would be something we're violently in agreement on that has been in the works and actually takes just supporting that and building on that. So I guess that's my biggest, that's where I would come down on the simple ways to address big money. There are questions about how to get to the consensus on such a complex issue, the thought process. That's to me is the biggest question around this one, especially for business people whose support would make a big difference. They don't have the time to go through the thought process to arrive at that as a root solution. At least we haven't found a quick way to show that link. So is that about long enough?
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Yeah, and for the meeting, anyone can speak as long or as short as you like. Yeah, feel free to take your time, and actually, even if you don't want to say anything, feel free to say, oh, I don't have anything right now. But so thank you so much. And Julie, thank you so much. It's so good to see you.
Now you see me. Sorry for being late in joining. Sorry about that.
No problem. I'm so glad you're here. And I was going to ask, would you like to, I know you're just jumping in, but would you like to talk next, since this was the subject that you proposed, and I thought it might be great to hear from you a little bit on why you wanted to talk about it.
Well, and I apologize if I am going to be repeating anything that's been said before. Don Bender and Steve Bender had brought up this idea to me over the years that, it's the nation doesn't hear most things unless they're paid for. Whether it be candidates, candidates or initiatives. But what we see has been influenced primarily by money, and it is an overwhelming. It's an overwhelming thing to tackle. He makes it. Don makes it sound easy, and or the concept easy, and just the idea about how do you eat the elephant, right? One bite at a time. So what are the things that we could chunk off and try to address that is in that line? That's really it. I can't solve the world's problems, but how can we do something that's repeatable, that's that we can communicate success to others, and that's achievable in some period of time, not our lifetime, but in some sort of where we can measure success. So that's really, I have no idea how to do it. I think that there would be power eventually when people understood that intuitively. X is something that you get to make a decision on that's influenced by lobbyists, et cetera, and Y is, influenced a different way. I think that after a while, it would be a natural thing that people would gravitate to. I just don't know what to do first.
All right. Thank you for sharing, Julie. And we're all taking turns. So Jeff, if you want to go next,
sure.
Feel free.
I think addressing Julie's point, this kind of stuff takes constant pressure. It needs to be constantly in the forefront of discussions we have. So for instance, our congressperson very often has town hall meetings, and whenever Elizabeth is my wife, by the way, whenever we go to these, or sometimes there's Zoom meetings or whatever, we try to always put a question card, submit a question card, or submit it on the chat or whatever. If 70% of the people in the United States agree that corporate political spending is an issue that leads to mistrust and a divergence away from what the citizenry wants. So what I'm talking about here are issues like climate change and things like that, where there's this huge, overwhelming majority of people in the United States that want to do something about it, right? And that never comes up. It never seems to somehow become a substantive, actionable issue. It's like, well, how is that happening? What's going on with that? And you almost have to be suspicious of it's because the way fossil fuel companies fund campaigns. It's got to be, Ted Cruz, when he was interviewing Buttigieg the other day about the Keystone XL pipeline, he said, Mr. Buttigieg, when you get rid of the Keystone pipeline, it's going to cost 1,200 good, solid jobs, union jobs. What are you going to say to the American people? And Buttigieg says, okay, well, renewable energy is going to account for 50 times those number of jobs. These people can be easily retrained for those. That doesn't require a college education. It's those kinds of things that you kind of go, why is Ted Cruz still adamantly supporting that? Well, it's because most of his contributions to the biggest contributor to his campaign are fossil fuel companies. Anyway, I've diverged a strong amount here. My point is, when we talk to our representative, we always bring up the issue of political spending and its influence on the decision-making process. And the people we've talked to, the staffers in the congressional offices and things, they always say, no, we're very independent. We always look at things independently, and you kind of go, I can't believe that anymore. If none of these issues come up as actionable issues in our political system, something else is going on. Somehow the will of the people is not being represented properly. So we go straight to our representatives and say, how do you feel about this? Are you in support of limiting campaign contributions? And whether or not our question gets addressed each time we do this, it sort of doesn't matter, in the sense that we will continue to keep asking the question. And every time we have a meeting with these folks, we will continue to bring it up and say, if we are to have faith in our institution, our political institutions, if we don't see action being taken on the things we care most about, how are we going to get to that point? So it's just keeping the pressure on. You can write letters, and I know that sounds like trying to swim up the waterfall, but these staffers that we've talked to, they keep track of this stuff. They do tally it. And I think if enough voices are heard like this, enough pressure, they sooner or later have to address it. American Promise has been working on trying to get states, I think we need, what is it, Elizabeth, 39 states to call for the amendment?
Can I answer?
Yeah.
So 38 states, and we now have 21.
Of 21. And that's just from people going to their state legislator and making it a point, or getting enough signatures to put it on a ballot. Those are concrete things you can do. They're hard to do, they take time, but I like to use the example of the suffragettes, right? The women that worked on getting the vote for women in this country, they worked over generations, and they were deeply committed to it because it's the right thing to do. It's sort of like civil rights in this country. It's the right thing to do, and you just keep pounding away at it, not even knowing if you're making a difference, but it's like, answering to your better angels and working on it anyway. And it'll take a portion of your time and you do it. So anyway, the short answer to the question is we try to speak to our representatives. We work on trying to get moving forward on any of these initiatives. I think you can go back and say, well, I want to work on global warming, I want to work on racial issues, or all that thing. Everything focuses back on money and politics. It's a harder burden to go there, because it's harder to explain to people that this is what's stonewalling whatever you're most passionate about. But when you get down to it, almost all of it filters back to something else is influencing our legislators, and it's just not our will. So, long-winded answer, but there you have it.
Thank you so much, Jeff. John, it's your turn next. Would you like to take an answer?
I'm here to kind of absorb mostly, and I appreciate the knowledge that Jeff and Elizabeth and Julie have already shared, because one of the things that I'm appreciated about this call so far is, I feel like, at least for the last 10 months, we lived in kind of crisis mode, the pandemic and other things. And I think, Jeff, as you seem to be, if you didn't say it directly, you said it indirectly, this is really a long range vision for the health of democracy, right? Getting this done. And so for me personally, it just feels very refreshing to be in this conversation, because it's not about, what's burning down the house right now, but it is. And I'm curious about a couple things. One of the things that Elizabeth said that I was really kind of tweaked my interest was, are you saying there's actual corporations that would be relieved of this expectation that they've got to throw these bundles of cash in every time there's a major campaign?
So again, is it okay? I don't know the format that way. I love it. So what we're hearing is companies saying we're held hostage, that it's legalized extortion. They're saying this mostly behind the scenes, although there are a handful of them now that are coming forward. The last one was last week, where someone said enough is enough. I wrote a blog post I'm happy to share with you, where a Fortune 500 CEO said, our money is being used against us to create enemies, people who view us as an enemy. Enough is enough. We have to stop this. There's no corporate executive that has gone on record calling for the amendment, but they are calling for non-spending. There was a New York Times article about IBM has a policy of no political spending, no direct, right? They have some indirect. And then we have 156 business professionals of all different levels who have signed our statement of principle at American Promise and explaining why they think political spending, an amendment to limit political spending would benefit the country and business. And we have an executive from Salesforce as one of them. So yes, it's really a big step for them to do a big declaration, but behind the scenes and qualified ways, they're saying this, they shouldn't have to pay to get access to their elected officials. So what's your reaction to that when you hear that?
Is the question to me or just to the group?
You and the group, yeah.
Well, again, it was just it's kind of a paradigm shift for me because I've kind of got this image in my head that once a corporation gets to a certain level, they want to throw their weight around. But so it's really interesting to hear that it's a lot more complex than that, that maybe some of these corporations are actually hearing the amount of animosity that there is towards them. So that's just good to know.
It's interesting that the fellow from Salesforce wrote an article for us and he said, this is building anti-business sentiment that doesn't have to be there. So.
Quick comment. I've been exposed to a lot of this with Elizabeth's work, and it's an arms race, right? So if you are a company that maybe has other competitors, as you contribute to let's say get a certain tax break or something like that, your competition now has to sort of do that same thing. And so it may have started out as, gee, I'm really enjoying this access. I've paid my dues to help my senator get elected, and now I have his ear. But as companies compete in that arena, it just draws cash away from, well, first it's an arms race and you just don't know how you're going to keep up. And then it draws cash away from things like R&D. So if we're going to compete on a global level, which is what free trade is all about, all that cash is being drained away from possibly producing the next great whatever product for society needs. So there's a lot of reasons why they don't like this stuff. As the country gets more divided, as corporations have to, if they reveal which side they've chosen, now people can decide, well, I'm not going to spend my money with that company because they're on the other side that I don't like. So there's risk involved with corporations making these types of donations, right? So I think there's a lot of reasons. If the field had just been leveled and we just say there's no more spending in that type of way, I think a lot of these guys would have a big sigh of relief, guys and gals. I don't doubt that they're tired of playing the game. And if you're a corporation of any good size, you're going to have the ear of your representative anyway, because you hire people, you are an employer, and the economy is king. And so you need to get a half-hour talk with your representative. I'm pretty sure you could get one if you are an employer of even small businesses have quite a voice now in this economy. They are the biggest employer out there. So yeah, I think they don't want to play the game is what it boils down to. It might have been fun in the beginning and they probably got some tax breaks and things, but I think it's gotten way out of hand.
And to Elizabeth's point, you know, this is a little bit of a burden. If you think about the the activities in the month of January, there have been plenty of organizations asking for their money back or not to be associated with certain funds. And it was probably one of those things where, you know, we do this all the time. We give our money to these guys every year. And all of a sudden, people are holding them to account. And whether it be their own ethics internally or their customers calling them on it, all of a sudden, you know, you don't know the next time you're going to look like the bad guy. So it's just another reason why, you know, being on the record for giving money, you know, as an organization that does this to this person isn't always, you know, optimal.
There's also a parallel trend that will make that even more relevant is there's a lot of pressure for them to disclose more than they do now. And so there's a group called the Center for Political Accountability that has just been incrementally pressuring companies through shareholder resolutions. And I think it's now something like 280 out of the Fortune 500 have pretty broad disclosure policies. And once they do that, the burden you're talking about becomes really, you know, evident, right? They're on the hook now because this disclosure includes their disclosure to dark money groups. So we don't have laws requiring disclosure of dark money, but if the companies are being held to disclose their contributions to dark money groups, then they have to take another look at those. And the biggest problem is if it's an arms race, then how do you get to a tipping point where you just go? And that's where I just checked, and I don't think Missouri has passed a resolution yet calling for the amendment. So it might be something interesting. I'd be curious to know what Dawn is thinking there. There is a candidate pledge for this, and the group that we're part of is the most famous nonpartisan one. There are Republican groups and Democratic groups that are calling for an amendment. But it'd be interesting to see if Missouri might get some candidate pledges or pledges from your recently elected officials in the wake of this, and possibly a state resolution. It can either be a direct ballot initiative or a resolution of the state legislature. Be the 22nd state. I don't know.
can I ask
You all know. Yeah.
I have a question of clarification because that was one of the other things that I thought was interesting. You're saying that with the American Promise Group, there's 21 states that have made a commitment to the amendment. Is that what I heard right? Can you explain that a little more clearly? I mean, how does that work? Is it has the state legislature made a formal resolution? Is that what the mechanism is?
There are two possible mechanisms, either state legislature passing a resolution, and the substance of it would basically be calling for an amendment that overlaps with the 28th Amendment, you know, the American Promise content, which I can explain, or a ballot initiative or referendum, depending on the state. So in California, where we're from, it was a ballot initiative. But I think, and in Alaska that just came through, it was a referendum. But in New Hampshire, it was a state legislature with cross-partisan representatives calling for it. So it can be either way. And what the resolution is doing is saying, if the US Congress passes this, we are ready to ratify it. So it's a way to force the Congress to say, this is the will of the people. And in all prior 27 amendments, you know, the Bill of Rights were all together. That, and sometimes the threat of a constitutional convention was what caused Congress to vote for, say, the right for women to vote, or 18-year-olds to vote, or election of senators, or things like that. So this is a kind of a normal way, and they've been working on it. Different groups have been working on it since 2010. It's similar to 8 other amendments that were done in response to Supreme Court decisions that just flew in the face of people's sense of how our democracy should work. But American Promise started 4 years ago with an explicitly cross-partisan foundational structure.
Thank you.
I should shut up now. But it's kind of exciting, and the people you meet as part of it are awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, and the last thing is the Rotary. We have a Rotary presentation at American Promise, and the Democracy in a Box things that Zachary is taking forward came out of that, and it's a vehicle for cross-generational conversations, possibly, about democracy. So it's a good way to kind of get the conversation going.
It was, I got to go to, Don Bender invited me to a lunch last year in a restaurant before COVID, right? When we could actually meet in a group. It was exciting to me to think that I was in a room with people who voted differently from me. And we were all very courteous of each other. And there was a shared sense of excitement that we were doing something, that we were working, the country that we love, that we might do something. So that's just I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe. It's a great experience to have.
Yeah, I mean, we
Oh.
felt when Elizabeth and I sorry, I'm just going to jump in. When Elizabeth and I went to these meetings in Washington, D.C. and stuff, we very much felt that same thing, John. It's surprising how many people are on board with that. And we really felt that this was kind of a thing that can help unify the country in a way, in our own small way. Because there's quite a broad consensus that we need to fix this, and democracies take work, and we all were willing to roll up our sleeves and do it. So yeah, I think you're right on that. We used to spend a lot more time talking to each other face to face and all of that stuff, and this is one of those things that helps facilitate those conversations again, and I like it a lot. Yeah.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. I'm learning a lot. And John, I just want to check, do you have anything else to share?
My question is, what state is Julie from?
I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, my daughter's in Portland, Oregon. That's wonderful.
All the cool kids are.
Yeah. Thank you. That's all. I just, mostly been just enjoying learning.
Awesome. Well, in that case, I will go ahead and take a short turn. Yeah, like I said, I've really been enjoying learning from all of this. This is a lot of very, very knowledgeable people on this call, so I appreciate it. And I love, Elizabeth, finding out, I had not heard about the concept of making all contributions anonymous. I think that's really interesting and could probably be helpful, but I agree with you that it, I think it feels like when we're talking about simple ways to get big money out of politics, maybe it might come down to that the only simple way to get big money out of politics is a constitutional amendment. And so we're talking more about that there may be other ways, and I would love to hear about them. But maybe, we're actually talking about simple ways to get the constitutional amendment to happen so that we can get big money out of politics. And one idea that I've been inspired by, which I'm sure you've all or probably you've heard of in various ways, is there's Final Five voting. I think that's a really exciting option, and Alaska just passed something that, from what I could tell, was basically like Final Four voting. And how that works, if you haven't heard of it, and my novice understanding of it is that party primaries are eliminated and there's one open primary race. And with final five voting, the top 5 vote getters in that open primary go to the general election. And then in the general election, there's ranked choice voting where voters get to rank the candidates according to their preferences, and the most preferred candidate will win. I really like this. I think it could be something that all these. It feels like all of these things work together, where anything to get big money out of politics is going to help something like that, which I think something like that is a positive reform for democracy, in addition to getting big money out of politics. And then it also feels like a way that we might be able to, if some states pass something like final five voting, it might help to speed up getting big money out of politics, because it will really change. I think it'll really change the dynamics of how that money works. Because, and this is just my impression, but it seems like that money can be especially destructive at the primary level, when there are party primaries. And so that's really all that I wanted to share about, and what I'm interested in. And yeah, I'm excited to continue this conversation. So we have time to do another round. Well, actually, we're pretty close to the end, but I'll see if we'll start another round and go from there. Give me just a second.
I hate to do this, but I have a distance learner that's having a little bit of a challenge getting into her 4 o'clock, so I have to run.
Okay.
Good to
That's
see
all right.
you.
It's
Thanks,
nice seeing you
Julie.
guys. I look
Thanks
forward
for
to
the
talking to
great
you soon.
topic, Julie.
Thanks. And yeah, I'm looking at American Promise, because I'm sure Oregon's probably on the list, but I'm gonna look into that. So thanks for the education.
The Oregon's on the list, but there's always more to do, and American Promise is a national community, so it would be great.
Thank you very much.
Okay. In that case, John, I'm going to check in with you. Is there anything you want to share? We just have a few minutes left in the meeting, but is there anything you want to share before we wrap up?
Just thanks to the folks. What do I want to say? This feels the opposite of feeling like I'm a victim, whatever that is.
Hopeful.
Whew. Nice.
That's great, John. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really positive experience for me. And I think since, well, no, we have a little more time. I'll keep going. Jeff, would you like to share some more?
Actually, I have more of a question for you, Zach. I was wondering if I like the ideas of ranked choice voting and that kind of stuff. I think it helps us get to more moderate candidates, because, when you have a bigger field of choice, you could say, well, this is my guy that I like the most, but I'd take this guy too. And enough people feel that way, it sort of gets you away from the extremes. Like right now with this pluralistic system that we have, this binary system, I should say, it's like, I don't even like my guy that much, but I'm not voting for that guy. So I wondered if you knew, like, in the states that have tried that, has that really panned out that way? Like, I just wondered how it's actually worked so far. It's a great idea. I just wondered if there's any, if you've read about or maybe know about states or even smaller municipalities that have worked that way, and is it achieving what they wanted it to achieve?
I think that's a great question, Jeff. And let me start. I don't know the answer to that really, and I think unfortunately ranked choice voting is pretty new in most cases. I think we could look into that in like in Maine and in some other places that have passed it. They're going to have it for the New York City mayor's race coming up, and so like we're just starting to see it emerge. But I think it might be. I don't know how these other countries do it, but I know that other countries use ranked choice voting, like Australia, I believe uses it. So it might be interesting to look into their politics and see how it's helping. I do believe that the consensus is that it kind of gets to more moderate candidates, and I remember a quote from someone in Australia saying, you know, it does make politics a little bit boring, but I'm not sure if that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Is there anything more that you wanted to share, Jeff?
I mean, just the one thing that's bringing to mind is that right now, with the way our politics work, there's always the attack ad, right? So if there's two people running in a primary or two people running against each other, you know, Republican, Democrat running against each other, if you had a field of 5 or 6, who do you attack now, right? It's sort of like, I'd have to attack 5 out of 6 people. It would certainly mess up the dynamic of the whole thing. It'd be very refreshing, I guess, instead of these last minute things that can't be refuted or whatever. But yeah, look, like we say, democracy is always a work in progress, and if it doesn't work, you change it again, right? So you'd rather at least try something versus just be stuck in the quagmire that we're in now. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Jeff. Elizabeth, would you like to share anything else here at the end?
I guess I would just say I love the way you described that, John, of the opposite of feeling like a victim. That sense of agency, and also the excitement you described with talking with people. And I have to say that when I've done the Rotary presentations, like Donna and I have done a couple, the amount of heart people bring to the love of the country is really heartening. You know, even if we voted differently, as Jeff had said. And then I'm now realizing that one way we need to measure these final 5, Zachary, great to hear about that, and ranked choice. We shouldn't measure just on who wins. We should measure on whether people trust the system and have confidence in the system and participate in the system. Those measures should be included too, because I think that's what we're trying to address. And I'm grateful for the chance to talk with you all. I'd be game to do a Rotary presentation with anybody who wants to partner. You know, with a Rotary Club, and they're all doing virtual now. So let me just I'll put that out there as a possible action, as you mentioned at the beginning. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for the facilitation.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. And yeah, so here we have arrived at the end, and yeah, just thank you all so much. This is really an experiment for me and a work in progress. And I really very deeply appreciate you all taking the time to participate in it. So I'll upload this recording to our Democracy in a Box YouTube channel for everyone to access. And watch for an email from Democracy in a Box that will have a survey about where we want to go from here. I'd like to keep it something where the Democracy in a Box community continues shaping the conversation, even though, you know, we'll keep simple ways to get big money out of politics as the central subject. But I'd like to find ways to make sure everyone still has input as we move forward. And I think you are, but if you don't think you're in our Democracy in a Box contacts, just send an email to democracyinabox@gmail.com and have a great night. I'll leave the Zoom meeting on for a couple minutes so you can say bye as you leave the call.
Thanks, everybody.
Betcha.
John,
Thank you,
nice-
John.
Nice meeting y'all.
Thanks, Zachary.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Oh, it was great. I learned so much. I got exposed to so much.
There's a lot in motion that if people realize that I keep thinking about that Geico commercial where the little gecko is speaking to Larry King. I don't know if you ever followed those, and he says, you know, if I told you could just stand up, you'd say 15%, but then you say no, I'm just gonna stay sitting down. It's like there's stuff in motion that we could support, right? That once people say this is important to me, so it's great to have a place where you can say, you know, there's American Promise is a phenomenal group of people.
Mm.
And you get that feeling like John and Jeff both described, and that I have felt in our, you know, in your facilitating the Democracy in a Box. It's a great, it's curative, you know.
I love that.